Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to break down complex research into, well, knowledge you can actually use.
That's the plan.
And today, we're doing a really deep dive into reinforcement learning, RL, specifically looking at how we get it out of the theory books.
Right. Moving past the pure math, the MDPs, the algorithms like ATC we've talked about before.
Exactly. Into tools that are actually practical, scalable, and, importantly, realistic for cyber penetration testing.
That's such a key step because the mission really is getting RL from the lab into the messy reality of a huge enterprise network.
We're talking potentially tens of thousands of hosts.
Or more, yeah. And right away, you slam into this massive wall. The state and action spaces just explode. They become, well, almost impossibly large.
And it's not just a this will take longer to compute kind of problem, is it? It's more fundamental.
Oh, absolutely. The core conflict is that scale versus realism tension you mentioned.
Yep.
If you simplify the network too much to make it tractable, the agent's findings, they don't really mean much for real security.
But if you try to model everything perfectly,
Then the compute load doesn't just creep up, it goes exponential. And the really critical thing, the most dramatic consequence of that poor scaling, it isn't just that it costs a fortune to run.
it's that the model might not learn anything useful at all.
Precisely. The research is clear on this. The model simply won't converge. It can't find a stable, optimal policy because the search space is just too ridiculously vast. The whole training effort essentially fails.
So today's deep dive is all about unpacking how researchers are tackling that specific problem. We're looking at architectural breakthroughs, things like the double agent architecture.
And clever reward engineering, yeah. Getting the motivation right.
To get past these showstoppers, we're exploring how you teach an AI to think, maybe not exactly like a human attacker, but with the same kind of strategic caution and realism.
It's a fascinating journey into practical scalability. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's really ground this discussion in just how severe that scaling problem is for cyber ops.
Right. In RL, you're always aiming for that optimal policy, a stable way of acting to get the best reward. But when the state space, everything the agent can possibly see or know gets huge.
It just can't explore enough.
Exactly. It can't reliably try out enough different paths, enough trajectories to figure out what actually works best long term.
And that leads to the policy failing to converge, which sounds technical, but it basically means...
Model is useless. It hasn't learned a consistent strategy. It's just flailing.
So any scalable solution has to start right back at the beginning with how you even define the problem for the agent, the MDP itself.
Absolutely. How you define the state, what the agent sees, and the actions, what it can do, that foundation dictates everything that follows. Success or failure often hinges right there.
Now, historically, what was the initial approach? I think you mentioned something about a top-down way.
Yeah, a lot of the early work in CyberRL tried this top-down method. The idea was you'd start by calculating or somehow compiling this massive pre-computed attack graph.
Like a complete map of every possible move.
Sort of, yeah. A static map showing every single potential step an attacker could theoretically take, from getting that first foothold all the way to their final objective. The agent's job was then just to find the best path through that pre-made map.
But even for, say, a medium-sized company network, those graphs must get enormous incredibly quickly. Why? What makes them blow up like that?
Well, there are a couple of big reasons. The main ones are just raw complexity and, crucially, partial information.
Okay, complexity is kind of intuitive. More machines, more connections, more paths.
Right, and it's not linear. You add one more host, and the number of potential attack paths doesn't just increase by a bit, it compounds because of all the new interactions.
But what about the partial information part? Why does not knowing everything make the map bigger? That seems counterintuitive.
Because the graph then has to account for every possibility created by that uncertainty. Think about it from the attacker's view. They know a host exists, maybe it's IP, but they don't know its open ports yet. So the pre-computed graph can't just show one path. It has to branch out to represent all the what-ifs. What if port 80 is open? What if port 22 is open? What if they're both closed? Each uncertainty multiplies the possibilities.
I see. So instead of one path, you get dozens or hundreds of hypothetical paths just because you lack that initial recon data.
Exactly. And when you layer uncertainty upon uncertainty across thousands of hosts, that top-down graph structure just becomes completely unsustainable. It's computationally impossible to build or navigate.
So if that map everything first approach is out, the shift has to be philosophical as much as technical, right?
Yeah.
towards something more like how real attackers work.
Absolutely. The necessary shift is towards a bottom-up approach, and this mirrors human tradecraft almost perfectly.
How so?
Well, a skilled human pen tester doesn't start with some magical, complete map of the target network. They start with very little information, maybe just initial recon, an IP range, a domain name.
And they build their understanding as they go.
Precisely. They build the attack path one action, one hop, one newly discovered piece of information at a time. They're constantly operating on partial information and updating their mental map.
So the RL agent needs to do the same. Start with minimal visibility.
And incrementally build its understanding of the environment only based on what it explores and what actions it takes.
This learning-as-you-go idea feels much more natural for RL.
It is, but it demands we completely rethink how we set up the problem. We have to ditch the reliance on that massive pre-computed attack graph. The network state has to be defined dynamically, based only on what the agent currently knows and can access.
Okay, so we've shifted philosophically to this bottom-up, learn-as-you-go approach, getting rid of the pre-computed map, but we still have that monster problem, the action space.
Right. Even without the full graph, in a big commercial network, thousands of hosts. Think about all the things an agent could do at any given moment.
It's overwhelming. You've got all the different exploits, all the types of scans, privilege escalation techniques, ways to maintain persistence.
And you have to multiply all of those options by the sheer number of potential target machines on the network.
That decision matrix the agent faces at every single step is just enormous.
It is. And you simply have to use strategies to cut down that dimensionality, to simplify the choices, before the agent even starts trying to learn. The research points to several ways, mostly rooted in practical domain knowledge.
What are some of the main simplification tactics?
Well, the most straightforward is just pruning, focusing the agent on a smaller subset of really relevant actions.
Like an attacker isn't going to try every CVE known to man, right?
Exactly. They'll focus on critical exploits, maybe reliable ones for common enterprise software, maybe recent high-impact ones. You can cut the list of potential exploits from thousands down to maybe a few dozen key ones.
Okay, that makes sense. And you can also group similar actions together, can't you? Abstract them.
Precisely. Instead of having separate actions for, say, 10 different web server exploits, you could have one generic attempt web exploit action, or a single scan subnet action instead of listing every Nmap flag combination.
That abstraction definitely simplifies things for the agent. What else?
Another key strategy is narrowing the scope. Focus the agent on specific attack scenarios or phases.
So instead of trying to teach the entire kill chain from start to finish in one go.
Right. You break it down. Train one agent configuration just for reconnaissance. Train another just for lateral movement inside the network. Train a third just for data exfiltration.
And by limiting the task, say, only lateral movement, the available actions become much more constrained, right? You're probably only looking at things like trying default passwords, RDP, maybe specific internal service exploits.
Exactly. The context limits the choices. And in some maybe more simplified research settings, you might even see the use of predefined playbooks.
Like scripting common pen test sequences.
Essentially, yeah.
Right.
It limits the agent to following known common attack patterns. It sacrifices creativity, obviously, but it can be a quick way to show that the basic RL approach is feasible for a specific narrow task.
But all this simplification, focusing, grouping, playbooks, there's a risk, isn't there? You might simplify away the important details, the nuances that make the simulation realistic.
That's the constant tension. How do you manage the complexity without losing fidelity? And that really leads us to a more structural solution, hierarchical reinforcement learning, or HRL.
HRL. Okay, how does that help manage the action space structurally?
It's a really powerful idea. HRL organizes the actions, well, hierarchically. You can picture it like a decision tree, as shown in the research figure 6.3, I think. The agent's decision-making gets split into different levels.
High-level strategy versus low-level execution.
Exactly. At the top level, the agent makes a broad strategic choice. Then, based on that choice, it moves to a lower level where it picks a specific tactical action consistent with that strategy.
Can you give an example? What's a high-level versus a low-level choice here?
Sure. A high-level goal might be something like, find a domain admin account. Once the agent commits to that goal, the only actions it considers at the next step are the low-level, specific ones needed to achieve it. Things like scan the local subnet for domain controllers, or attempt known exploit X against that specific LDIP service, or try password spraying with common passwords.
And crucially, It wouldn't consider actions related to, say, exfiltrating data at that point.
Right, because that's not relevant to its current high-level goal of finding an admin account. It prunes away unrelated branches of the decision tree automatically.
That delegation, that focusing of attention, must be incredibly helpful. It stops the agent from getting swamped by considering everything all at once.
It simplifies the effective action space at any given moment by potentially orders of magnitude. The agent focuses on the big picture first, then the details.
And this idea of splitting up the decision-making. It feels like a natural bridge to thinking about using multiple agents, doesn't it?
It really does. Multi-agent systems, or MAS, are another key piece of the puzzle for scaling and improving how the agents explore the environment.
And the benefits go beyond just parallel processing, right? It's not just about dividing the work.
Oh, definitely not. There are several systemic advantages to using multiple agents in the simulation.
What are the main ones?
I'd say there are three big ones. First is diverse exploration. If you have several agents, maybe starting in different parts of the network or trained with slightly different reward signals, they'll naturally explore a much wider range of potential strategies simultaneously. This helps avoid getting stuck in a single, maybe suboptimal solution.
Makes sense. More explorers covering more ground. What's second?
Knowledge sharing. The agents don't have to operate in total isolation. You can design mechanisms for them to share what they've learned, maybe successful tactics or parts of the network map they've uncovered. This collective learning can really speed things up.
Okay, diverse exploration, shared knowledge. What's a third benefit? You mentioned it's often overlooked.
It's the potential for competitive dynamics. Even if the agents are technically cooperating towards a common goal, their interactions can spur better performance.
How so? Like they're racing each other.
Sometimes, yeah. Or imagine two agents trying to compromise the same high-value server. Their interaction might push them to try riskier, more innovative tactics than a single agent would alone. It can really help balance that tricky exploration versus exploitation trade-off, pushing the boundaries of what the system learns.
So using multiple agents isn't just about horsepower. It's about smarter, broader, potentially more creative learning.
Exactly. And this multi-agent thinking is fundamental to the big architectural shift needed for these really large-scale networks.
Right, so we've established we need to ditch that top-down, pre-computed attack graph. The first big practical step towards handling thousands of nodes is exactly that. Stop trying to build the giant map up front.
Yeah, the runtime savings from not computing that graph are huge. But like we said, the core problem convergence still remains. How do you handle the network information dynamically and make decisions efficiently?
And the solution seems to be this requirements-driven approach.
That's the key. It mirrors how a human attacker thinks. They don't consult a giant static map. They look at what they know right now, what they need to achieve next, and what actions are actually possible from their current position.
So how does the research define the state vector in this requirements-driven way? What information does the agent actually track?
It's designed very carefully. The state vector is usually a nested structure, but it only encodes the parts of the network that actually change as the agent attacks.
So not the entire network layout every single time.
No, that would be incredibly inefficient. Instead, you track dynamic variables, things like which hosts are currently reachable from the agent's current position, what's the agent's access level on each compromised host, user, admin. Has a host been flagged as infected or scanned? It's a much leaner representation.
And the whole point of this minimal state is to directly answer the agent's immediate practical question. Okay, given what I know, what can I do next?
Exactly. And that leads directly to the power of action masking. This is how we manage the still huge potential action space dynamically.
Action masking. Like blinders for the agent.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it like safety goggles that only let the agent see and choose actions that are logically possible given its current state and knowledge.
So if the agent hasn't even discovered host Z yet,
then any action targeting host C, like trying an exploit, is literally masked out. It's removed from the list of choices for that step. The agent simply can't select it.
Which stops it from wasting time in computation trying impossible things.
Precisely. It keeps the decision-making focused only on valid next steps.
Okay, but even with this clever masking and a lean state vector, if you have 10,000 hosts, just deciding which valid host to target next is still a massive decision, right?
Yeah.
This seems to bring us to the double agent architecture, the DAA. You called it conceptually brilliant.
It really is the architectural cornerstone for making these large environments tractable. The core idea of the DAA is to manage the decision complexity by breaking one very complex decision into two much simpler sequential decisions. And it's based directly on how an attacker thinks.
Walk us through that breakdown. Why is splitting the decision mathematically so advantageous for scaling?
Okay, think about a standard flat RL model. At each step, the agent has to figure out the probability of taking a specific action on a specific host given its current state. Let's call that p-text action on host text.
Right.
Now, if you have, say, men and the null are possible actions, exploits, scans, etc., and null are possible hosts where null could be thousands, the total number of choices is $ times $n. That joint probability space gets enormous very fast. That's where the exponential scaling problem bites you.
Okay, so the DAA avoids calculating that huge $ times $n probability directly.
Exactly. It factorizes the decision. It breaks it into two distinct steps, handled by two specialized agents.
Agent 1.
One, the exploration agent. You can think of this as the strategic or navigator agent. Its job is only to decide which host to focus on next. It calculates p-texty. It's purely concerned with movement or target selection across the network topology.
Okay, so it picks the where, then what?
Two, the exploitation agent. This is the tactical agent. Once the exploration agent has chosen a host, the exploitation agent only decides which action to perform on that specific host. It calculates b-text action. Its decision space is just $8, the number of actions, regardless of how many hosts there are in total.
I see it now. By splitting where and what, the complexity is no longer multiplicative in the number of hosts. It's more like two separate, much smaller problems solved, one after the other. You've decoupled the strategic target selection from the tactical action choice.
That factorization is the absolute key to managing the scale. But interestingly, the research found that just using this DAA structure with older RL algorithms like A to C, advantage actor critics still had limitations. It worked, but it kind of stalled out beyond maybe a few hundred nodes.
So the architecture was right, but the engine driving it needed an upgrade. What was A to C lacking?
ATC is a solid algorithm, but it can be quite sensitive to hyperparameters like the learning rate. And sometimes it doesn't learn very efficiently from the data, it's sample inefficient. It needed something more robust for these really complex, noisy environments.
Which brings us to the upgrade. DAPPO. So both the exploration and exploitation agents are now using proximal policy optimization.
Correct. PPO has become something of a workhorse, maybe even the gold standard, in modern RL precisely because it offers better stability and efficiency, especially in challenging tasks.
For listeners who aren't deep RL specialists, what's the core reason PPO is generally more stable and performs better than something like A to C, particularly here?
It really comes down to how PPO handles policy updates, specifically through its clipped surrogate objective function. That sounds technical. Let me try to explain.
Please do.
Imagine your agent has been training for a long time and has a pretty good, stable strategy. Then suddenly it tries something new, maybe exploits a new host, and gets a massive reward signal.
Okay, a big win.
Right. Now, a simpler algorithm like A2C might react to that big signal by making a huge, drastic change to its policy in one go.
Which could be bad.
It could be catastrophic. It might completely destabilize the policy, throwing away all the good, careful learning it did before. It's called performance collapse. PPO is designed to prevent that.
Ow.
The clipped surrogate objective, you can see it visualized in figure 6.4, acts like a safety brake. It looks at the ratio between the proposed new policy and the current trusted policy. If the proposed change is too large, too different from what the agent already knows works reasonably well, PPO clips the update. It limits how big a step the policy can take in any single update.
So it encourages smaller, more conservative steps,
Yeah.
preventing those wild swings that can wreck performance.
Exactly. That inherent stability, combined with better sample efficiency learning more effectively from each interaction with the environment, is what allows the DA-PPO combination to successfully scale up to networks with thousands of nodes. It pushes way past the limits of tens or maybe 100 nodes that earlier methods were stuck at.
Okay, so we've tackled the scaling beast with DA-PPO, but a scalable agent isn't useful if it doesn't act realistically, right? It needs the right motivation.
You absolutely nailed the next critical piece. Scalability without realism is just, well, fast nonsense. To get an agent that generates attack paths a human might actually consider, you need to give it realistic motivation.
And in the world of RL, motivation comes down entirely to the reward function. how you score the agent's actions.
Precisely. If you design a simplistic or frankly naive reward function, you'll get technically valid attack paths that make absolutely no operational sense.
Like an agent that sets off every alarm bell on the way to its target because it only cared about speed.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
And a really common trap in early cyber RL work was basing rewards directly on the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS.
Right, CVSS. That gives you a score, 0 to 10, based on how severe a vulnerability is, technically. Seems logical to reward exploiting high CDS flaws? No. Why is that approach flawed?
Because CVSS is purely about technical severity. It tells you things like, how easy is the exploit? What's the technical impact, confidentiality, integrity, availability loss? But it completely ignores the operational context.
What kind of context is missing?
Crucial things like, what's the actual business value of the data on that machine? Are there specific security controls watching that host, like EDR or enhanced logging? What's the likelihood of detection if I try this exploit? What's the attacker's real strategic goal? Are they after data or persistence or disruption? CVSS knows none of that.
So an agent optimizing purely for the highest CDSS score might happily attack a system that's technically vulnerable but operationally suicidal, like trying a noisy exploit against the Security Operations Center's main server.
Precisely. You end up with agents converging on these bizarre, unrealistic attack paths that completely ignore detection risk, stealth, or the actual value of the target. The sole reliance on CVSS introduces a powerful bias away from realistic tradecraft.
So how do we inject that missing context? The research seems to borrow from a, perhaps, unexpected place, military doctrine.
Yeah, specifically intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or IPB. This is the core idea behind the cyber terrain framework.
IPB. In the physical world, that's about analyzing the ground, right? Cover, concealment, observation points, avenues of approach. How does that translate to a network?
You translate those concepts. In cyber operations, the terrain framework focuses on analogous factors like visibility within the network, what can I see from here? Mobility, how easily can I move laterally? Choke points, like firewalls, and the value of different network locations. Figure 6.5 illustrates some of this.
So a human attacker intuitively assesses this cyber terrain. They don't just see a vulnerability score. They see a vulnerable server inside the finance subnet, protected by a specific firewall, with logging likely enabled.
Exactly. And the RL agent's reward structure must reflect that contextual awareness. The reward or penalty for an action shouldn't depend just on the target node itself, but also on its neighbors, its function, and the defenses the agent anticipates based on the services running or the firewall rules it might have discovered.
This sounds like it leads naturally to engineering negative rewards penalties to make the agent risk-averse, like a real attacker trying to stay hidden.
That's a huge part of it. Making the agent understand risk requires carefully designed penalties.
How does the research quantify that risk? You mentioned a service-based penalty system.
Right. The idea is to categorize network services based on how sensitive they typically are, and therefore how likely they are to be heavily monitored.
What are the categories?
Typically something like authentication services, think domain controllers, LDAP, anything handling logins, very sensitive. Data services, databases, file servers, high value. Security services themselves. SIMs, vulnerability scanners, attacking these is risky. And then maybe common services, basic web servers, print servers, lower sensitivity.
And then you assign penalties based on these categories.
Exactly. You create a hierarchy of negative rewards. The assumption is that defenders apply security controls most strictly to the riskiest services.
Give us some example numbers to make it concrete.
Okay, purely illustratively, maybe attempting to exploit an authentication service incurs a big penalty, say Meta 6, because getting caught there is really bad. Attacking a data service might be Meta 4. Attacking a security or common service might only be Meta 2.
So that quantitative structure forces the agent to weigh the potential gain from compromising a host against the potential cost or risk of getting detected attacking that type of service. It's not just about CVSS anymore.
It's about gain minus risk. And critically, this penalty structure also needs to differentiate between different types of actions, reconnaissance versus exploitation.
Because scanning is generally less noisy, less likely to trigger alarms than actually throwing an exploit.
Right. So scanning actions should incur a much smaller penalty than exploitation actions, even against the same type of service. If exploiting that data service was a Megas 4 penalty, maybe just scanning it is only a Megas 1 penalty.
That directly encodes the caution a human attacker employs. scout things out first, because scouting is less risky than attacking.
Exactly. You build that strategic preference for stealth right into the reward penalty system. That's how you start to get behavior that looks more like careful planning and less like a bull in a china shop.
Okay, we've got a scalable architecture with VAPPO, and we've got realistic motivation using cyber terrain concepts and risk-aware rewards. Now, how do we actually build the world, the large-scale simulation environment for this AI agent to operate in? Where does the data come from?
Well, you typically start by using the same kinds of tools a human pen tester would use to gather information about a network. The absolute foundation is often Nmap.
Good old Nmap. Still essential.
Absolutely. Nmap gives you the basics: what ports are open on hosts, what services are likely running on those ports, maybe OS fingerprinting, and often traceroute information, which helps infer the network topology and distances between nodes.
So you gather all this real-world or realistic data IP ranges, subnets, open ports, service versions, which implies potential vulnerabilities via CPE data, known CVSS scores for those vulnerabilities, maybe some critical firewall rules. Yeah. Then what? How do you package that for the RL agent?
All that diverse information gets consolidated into a structured format. A common choice is a single, comprehensive YAML file. This YAML file effectively defines the synthetic network environment for the simulation.
So even though we're not pre-computing the giant attack graph anymore, all the underlying data about topology, services, and vulnerabilities is still there in this structured file.
Exactly. It's available for the simulation to query dynamically. When the agent performs a scan action, the simulation checks the YAML data for that host to determine what the agent discovers. When it tries an exploit, the simulation checks if the relevant vulnerability exists on that host in the YAML data. It informs the simulation's responses.
Right. So with this realistic, large-scale synthetic environment ready, the RL agent can now be trained on specific practical pen testing tasks that go way beyond just find a path from A to B.
Definitely. The research explores several core tasks. One of the really interesting ones is surveillance detection routes, or SDRs.
SDRs? That sounds like pure reconnaissance.
It is. The agent's goal in SDR is specifically to maximize its insight into the network, discover valuable hosts, identify services, find vulnerabilities, while actively minimizing its risk of being detected during this recon phase.
It's modeling that classic attacker dilemma, needing to gather information without revealing your presence. Asymmetric information gathering.
Perfectly put. It's about finding the safest paths to scout from, learning as much as possible while leaving the fewest possible footprints, like logs. You can see how the reward function here would heavily penalize noisy scans or probing sensitive systems. Figure 6.6 in the research likely illustrates this kind of pathfinding.
Okay, so that's the cautious scouting phase. What about when the goal is actually moving data?
That leads to modeling exfiltration paths. Here, the agent has already compromised something valuable, and the goal is to get that data out of the network.
And again, stealth is key, presumably.
Critically important. The reward function here isn't just about reaching an external node, it's about doing it quietly. The rewards are structured to minimize detection signals.
How does that work in practice?
It often means favoring specific low and slow tactics. Maybe using only a single network protocol that blends in, well, like DNS tunneling or hiding data in normal-looking HTTPS traffic. The agent might learn that the shortest path isn't the best path if it crosses heavily monitored network segments.
So it might choose a longer, more roundabout route if that route avoids triggering alerts, like figure 6.10 might show.
Exactly. The optimal path is the one with the lowest cumulative detection probability, even if it takes longer.
Okay, recon and exfil make sense. What about modeling a more complete attack campaign?
That brings us to command and control, or C2 modeling. This is more complex because it's inherently multi-stage.
What are the stages?
You need to model the initial infection or compromise, then the agent establishing a connection back to its external C2 server, the beaconing, and then using that channel for actual operations, like uploading more tools or ultimately exfiltrating data.
And the realism here comes from modeling the defender's reaction.
Yes. Crucially, you need to incorporate dynamic defenses into the simulation for C2.
What do you mean by dynamic defenses?
Think about how a real security operations center, a SOC, responds. They use rules and thresholds. So the simulation can incorporate similar logic. For instance, if the RL agent's C2 beaconing becomes too frequent, too many connections in a short time, or if it tries to upload a suspiciously large file, say 10 gigabytes, really quickly,
the simulated defense reacts.
Exactly. The simulation might trigger a dynamic firewall update that blocks the port the agent was using or quarantines the compromised machine.
Wow. So the agent has to learn countermeasures.
It has to learn C2 discipline. It needs to learn to strategically insert sleep commands between beacons, or maybe vary its connection protocols, or throttle its data transfer rates to stay below those detection thresholds. That adds a huge layer of realism.
That's fascinating. Okay, one more specific task mentioned. Ransomware. What's special about simulating that? Obviously, you need an encrypt action.
You do need the encrypt action, yes. But the key defensive element you must include in the simulation to make it realistic is the concept of honeypots.
Ah, deceptive systems, lures for attackers.
Precisely. Honeypots look like attractive targets, maybe a file server or a database, but they contain no real production data and are heavily monitored.
So what happens if the ransomware agent hits a honeypot in the simulation?
If the RL agent tries its encrypt action on a system flagged as the honeypot, the simulation immediately registers a high-certainty detection event. It essentially tells the defender side of the simulation, we've caught them, and here's exactly how they tried to operate.
So it's not just about avoiding detection, but also about learning to recognize and bypass these deliberate traps.
Exactly. The agent has to learn that not all seemingly valuable targets are safe to attack. Incorporating deception and the risk of triggering honeypots is vital for modeling the complexities of defending against threats like ransomware.
All right, so we've got DAPPO solving the scaling problem and cyber terrain rewards bringing in the realism. That's a huge leap forward. But there's still a challenge, right? The way it's often done now, you train the agent pretty much specifically for each network environment.
That's a key limitation, yeah. If you want a tool that's truly practical, it needs to handle the sheer diversity of real-world networks. Thousands of nodes, different architectures, different security postures, and maybe even different attacker goals without needing complete retraining every single time. We need the models to be more extensible and able to generalize.
So how do we get there? How do we make the agent learn more broadly?
This is where techniques like multitask learning, MTL, come into play.
Multitask learning. How is it different from just training separate agents for, say, reconnaissance and exfiltration?
The core idea of MTL is to train a single underlying model, usually a single neural network, to perform multiple related tasks simultaneously. So the same core network learns how to do SDR and how to find exfiltration paths and how to manage C2 all at once.
How does that help with generalization?
Because the different tasks often share underlying features or concepts. Think about it. Understanding network topology, identifying valuable services, assessing risk, these are fundamental skills needed for all those tasks.
Ah, so the lower layers of the neural network learn these common foundational skills.
Exactly. By learning these shared representations across multiple tasks, the model becomes much better at applying that knowledge to a new, unseen network environment, or even a slightly different task variation. It forces the model to learn the essentials, which helps prevent it from just memorizing the quirks of one specific training network. It acts as a powerful regularizer.
Okay, so MTL helps the agent learn related skills more efficiently and generalize better. What about handling goals that might actually conflict with each other, like speed versus stealth?
That's the perfect lead-in to multi-objective learning, MOL. This paradigm is specifically designed for situations where you need to optimize multiple, often conflicting objectives at the same time.
And that speed versus stealth trade-off is a classic attacker dilemma.
Absolutely. A real attacker is constantly balancing these. Maximize the amount of data stolen versus minimize the chance of getting caught. Maximize the speed of lateral movement versus minimize the noise generated. You usually can't have it all. Pushing hard on one objective often means sacrificing performance on another.
So if you go super fast, you get detected easily. If you're incredibly stealthy, it might take forever to achieve the goal.
That's the inherent tension MOL is built to handle, instead of trying to find a single best solution by arbitrarily weighting these conflicting goals.
Like saying stealth is twice as important as speed.
Right. Instead of doing that, MOL aims to find a set of solutions that represent the optimal trade-offs between the objectives. This set of solutions is famously known as the Pareto front.
The Pareto front. Let's unpack that a bit for the listener. What does that set of solutions actually represent in practice?
Imagine a graph. One axis is, say, exfiltration speed, and the other is detection risk. The Pareto front is like a curve on that graph. Every point on that curve represents an optimal strategy in a specific sense. From that point, you cannot improve on one objective, like increase speed, without necessarily making the other objective worse. like increasing risk.
So any point on the curve is a best possible compromise for a given balance between the goals. You can't get faster without taking more risk, and you can't get stealthier without going slower.
Precisely. It maps out the boundary of achievable, optimal trade-offs. Any solution not on the front is suboptimal because you could improve one objective without hurting the other.
This output seems incredibly valuable, maybe even more for the defender than the attacker.
That's a key insight. For defenders, understanding the Pareto front generated by a realistic agent model allows them to anticipate the different types of adversaries they might face.
How so?
By looking at the shape of that curve, you can see the strategies available to different attacker profiles. Down at one end, you might see the path chosen by a very slow, careful, highly risk-averse attacker, maybe like a state-sponsored APT group. Their optimal strategy involves low speed, but extremely low detection risk.
And at the other end?
You'd see the strategies favored by a smash-and-grab crew, high speed, high volume, but accepting a much higher risk of detection. The Pareto front shows you the range of rational, optimal behaviors depending on the attacker's priorities.
So as a defender, you can use this to think about where different types of motivated adversaries are most likely to operate on that trade-off curve, and then tailor your defenses accordingly.
Exactly. It transforms defense planning from just patching vulnerabilities to strategically allocating resources like deploying advanced sensors or deception tech based on anticipating the likely strategic choices of the adversaries you care most about. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow, that was quite the journey. We've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, moving reinforcement learning towards something genuinely practical for complex cybersecurity tasks.
We really have. We saw the critical need to move beyond those early theoretical models and tackle the scaling problem head-on.
And the key architectural shift was getting rid of that massive pre-computed attack graph and adopting the double-agent architecture, the DAPPO approach, which finally made simulations on networks with thousands of hosts feasible.
But scale wasn't enough. We saw that realism demanded moving past simplistic rewards, like just using CVSS scores, injecting concepts from cyber terrain, thinking about risk, visibility, mobility. That's what starts to make the agent's motivation look more human.
Engineering that motivation, that risk aversion, through careful reward and penalty design. And then looking ahead, we touched on how multitask learning helps models generalize across different networks and tasks.
And how multi-objective learning is crucial for modeling those inherent conflicting goals, speed versus stealth, risk versus reward, and understanding the strategic trade-offs attackers face via the Pareto front.
It feels like this integration of techniques takes RL and penetration testing way beyond just finding a sequence of exploits.
Oh, absolutely. It's moving towards anticipating the attacker's intent, their strategic motivation, given the specific context of your network.
And that feels like the final provocative thought here. Understanding the why behind an attacker's choices, why they might choose a noisy, fast path versus a slow, stealthy one, or value certain data over other data, that fundamentally changes how defenders should think about prioritizing their efforts.
It really does. If you can simulate the motivated adversary, you can start to predict where the most damaging attacks driven by specific motivations are likely to occur. You can optimize your defenses based on anticipating behavior, not just reacting to vulnerabilities.
Knowing the likely trade-offs your adversaries will make, that seems like the ultimate edge.
It truly is. Understanding their calculus of risk versus reward in your specific environment is potentially the biggest advantage you can get in this ongoing cyber arms race.
So we'll leave you with that thought. How do those trade-offs, speed versus stealth, risk versus reward, play out in your own systems? And how are you currently prioritizing your defenses against adversaries who might be making very different calculations about those trade-offs? Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.